Zralthak moved away from the observation deck, his ceremonial armor clicking against the polished obsidian floor. The war room expanded around him, a cavernous chamber where a dozen Vraxian officers monitored Earth's defenses through neural interfaces. Their cranial ridges pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, a physiological sign of anticipation among their kind. Tactical assessment, Zralthak demanded. First Hunter Kavex gestured at the central projection. Their most advanced weapons are fusion-based explosives delivered by primitive ballistic systems. Reaction time from detection to launch, approximately 8 minutes. Our countermeasures will neutralize them before they clear their atmosphere. Their communications, primarily electromagnetic, with some quantum-adjacent satellite networks that show rudimentary encryption. Our signal disruptors will sever their command structure in the first 60 seconds. Zralthak's inner eyelids flickered thoughtfully. And their biological vulnerabilities. Science Director Mevnar approached, her smaller frame and pale scales marking her as from the northern continent of their homeworld. Fascinating specimens, Supreme Hunter. Their bodies are water-based, with minimal natural protection. No redundant organs, no significant resistance to toxins. Their atmosphere contains oxygen levels that would be considered poisonous on our world. Psychological profile. Tribal by nature, they organize into arbitrary geographical collectives they call nations, which frequently engage in internal conflicts over resources, ideology, and territory. There are 195 such divisions currently active. Our models predict they will prioritize individual national survival over species-wide cooperation. Zralthak clicked his talons against the command console, bringing up footage from Earth's recent conflicts. Their fighting techniques, primitive but persistent, offered combat specialist Drosk. They still engage in physical combat despite their fragility. Their elite warriors train for approximately 1/20th of a Vraxian combat education. Their strategic doctrines are largely unchanged for centuries, focused on territorial acquisition rather than efficient species elimination. And their greatest strength? Zralthak asked, following the standard conquest protocol questionnaire. The room fell silent momentarily. Finally, cultural analyzer Tevrak spoke. Adaptability, perhaps. They occupy diverse environments across their planet with minimal technological assistance. They show unusual creativity in tool development. However, this manifests primarily over generational timescales, not tactical ones. Zralthak absorbed this final assessment with a dismissive flick of his primary sensory ridge. Adaptability is meaningless without time. We will give them none. He activated the ship-wide announcement system, his voice reverberating through the 17 vessels comprising the hunting fleet, warriors of the Dominion. Today we add another world to our collection. This conquest will proceed according to standard protocols. Minimal expenditure for maximum resource acquisition. Turning to his neural interface, he uploaded the final attack coordination to the fleet. The plan was elegant in its precision. Simultaneous strikes at 1,342 locations across the planet, targeting military command, communications infrastructure, energy production, and transportation networks. Secondary strikes would eliminate governmental structures. By the time humans realized what was happening, their capacity for organized resistance would be shattered. Zralthak's mouthparts arranged themselves into the Vraxian expression of satisfied anticipation. In his 4 centuries of life, he had personally overseen 12 planetary acquisitions. None had presented meaningful challenges. Earth would be no different. Just another trophy in the Dominion's relentless expansion. Initiate hunting protocol in 30 minutes, he commanded. I will observe from the primary shuttle during the first wave. As the war room erupted into efficient activity, Zralthak permitted himself a moment of reflection. This would likely be his final conquest before elevation to the Supreme Council. It seemed fitting that such a visually appealing world would become his career's culmination. Begin the countdown, he ordered, unaware that he was about to make the most catastrophic miscalculation in Vraxian military history. Dr. Singh moved through the hospital's emergency ward, now illuminated only by battery-powered surgical lights and the glow of fires visible through the windows. Without functioning elevators, orderlies transported patients via stretchers down smoke-filled stairwells. The casualties displayed injuries she'd never encountered in 15 years of emergency medicine. Crystalline shrapnel embedded in tissue, burns that shifted color under different lighting, nervous systems temporarily rewired by alien energy weapons. Pressure bandages are depleted on the 3rd floor, called out Nurse Patel, checking the handwritten inventory. And we've got 20 more incoming from the Chandni Chowk attack. Singh made a quick calculation. Repurposed the sterile drapes from the surgical suites. Boil what we can. For the energy burns, the cooling gel seems to stabilize the tissue, prioritize its use on respiratory exposures. Outside, the distinctive hum of Vraxian hover transports grew louder. Singh gestured to the hospital's head of security, a former military officer who had organized an ad hoc defense force from ambulance drivers and maintenance staff. "They're getting closer, Doctor," he warned, distributing the few available weapons. "We have 6 minutes," she replied, consulting the pattern she'd been tracking on a paper map. "These attacks run on precise intervals. Hold position until the last possible moment, then execute the evacuation plan to the underground levels." The hospital's basement, originally designed as a bomb shelter during more terrestrial conflicts, had been hastily converted into an auxiliary treatment facility. Unlike the upper floors with their sophisticated electronic systems, now useless, the basement relied on mechanical ventilation and plumbing that remained functional. Singh turned to her surgical team. "Remember, we're seeing coagulation failure with the crystalline wounds. Traditional clotting agents are ineffective. We'll need to cauterize immediately." As her team prepared for the incoming casualties, Singh's mind cataloged everything she'd observed about the invaders. Their methodical approach suggested they valued efficiency over maximum destruction. They were conquering, not exterminating. That distinction might prove crucial. Across the city, banker Michael Chen had transformed the bank's reinforced vault into a community shelter. The 2-foot-thick walls provided protection from alien scans, while the emergency ventilation system, mandated by safety regulations for hazardous gas releases, kept the air breathable for the 63 people now crammed inside. They hid every major financial hub in the same pattern, Chen explained to the frightened group, pointing to information gathered through text messages in the brief windows when communication sporadically functioned. Singapore, London, New York, Tokyo, Frankfurt, all within the same 3-minute window. This isn't random. They're systemically dismantling our infrastructure. A teenage girl looked up from a ham radio she'd assembled from components in the bank's obsolete electronics. "I'm picking up signals from other operators. The attacks are synchronized globally, but they're not hitting residential areas unless they're near strategic targets." Chen nodded. "They want our resources, not a wasteland. That means they need at least some of us alive." Outside, a Vraxian patrol marched past the bank, their scaled forms silhouetted against burning buildings. Their movements were unnervingly precise, each step identical to the last, weapons held at exactly the same angle. They showed no interest in the humans hiding beneath the streets, instead focusing on securing the financial district's infrastructure. In her underground hospital, Dr. Singh came to the same realization as she operated on a police officer with crystalline shards embedded near his heart. The invasion had a pattern. Patterns could be studied. Studied things could be predicted. Predicted things could be countered. "Get me every scrap of information about their movements," she told a group of paramedics preparing to venture out for more survivors. "Times, locations, targets, everything. We're not just treating the wounded anymore. We're gathering intelligence." As the hospital lights flickered again, Singh made a silent promise to herself and her patients. The aliens thought they were simply processing resources. They would learn that humans were anything but predictable. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez shifted position among the ruins, his makeshift ghillie suit incorporating urban debris that matched the shattered concrete around him. The copper discovery had led to something bigger, observing that alien communications briefly faltered near certain Earth metals. He'd fashioned crude disruption devices from salvaged electrical components, allowing his small band of survivors to move between observation posts undetected. 3 blocks away, a Vraxian patrol suddenly altered its route. Deviating from the clockwork precision Rodriguez had documented over the past week, something had changed in their tactics. "They're adapting," whispered Corporal Lin, the communications specialist who'd survived the initial attack by being inside a lead-line server room. "They're varying patrol routes by 13% from established patterns." Rodriguez nodded. "They're learning." "Good. So are we." He keyed a simplified Morse code into the modified walkie-talkie that operated on frequencies Binge Park had identified as invisible to alien monitoring. The Resistance had dubbed these ghost channels, old analog bandwidths the digitally oriented invaders overlooked. Ghost actual to network. Target Romeo 3 showing tactical evolution. Confirm similar observations in your sectors. Across the city, 6 other observation teams reported the same findings. The aliens were adjusting, which paradoxically encouraged Rodriguez. It meant they were responding to losses caused by humans whom they had expected to submit without significant resistance. As darkness fell, Rodriguez led his team through the drainage tunnels beneath Chicago. The Rendezvous Point was an abandoned subway maintenance facility, its existence purged from digital records during a security upgrade 3 years earlier. Inside, 37 fighters from military and civilian backgrounds gathered around makeshift maps. "Water remains their primary vulnerability," reported Diane Chen, a chemical engineer who'd been testing various compounds. "But they're developing countermeasures, a hydrophobic coating on their exoskeletons. We have maybe 72 hours before this tactic becomes ineffective." Rodriguez absorbed this information without visible reaction. Adaptation required calm assessment, not emotional response. "Then we evolve our approach." "Dr. Chen, can your team neutralize the coating?" "Working on it. Concentrated saline solutions show promise. They penetrate the hydrophobic barrier through ionic disruption." A former HVAC technician raised his hand. "Their environmental sensors appear optimized for detecting body heat and motion, but they struggle with rapidly changing thermal signatures." This sparked an idea from a firefighter. "We could use thermal blankets coupled with controlled heat sources as decoys." The collaborative problem-solving continued as Minji's voice crackled over the ghost channel. "Network to all cells. New intelligence from Sydney. Alien vessels are concentrating around fresh water sources. They're processing something from our water. Deuterium extraction, according to a nuclear physicist in their cell." Rodriguez processed this information. "They're not just conquering. They're harvesting specific resources." The implications spread through the room. If the aliens needed Earth's resources, it meant they couldn't simply obliterate resistance from orbit. They needed functional infrastructure, which limited their tactical options and gave humanity leverage. As the meeting concluded, Rodriguez assigned new observation rotations. Their resistance was no longer just about survival. It was strategic intelligence gathering that might reveal the invaders' critical vulnerabilities. Later that night, alone in his makeshift quarters, Rodriguez studied a thermal image captured of an unarmored Vraxian. Their biology was fundamentally different, cold-blooded, silicon-based, with multiple redundant systems, yet they required water despite being seemingly vulnerable to it, suggesting a complex relationship with the compound. He recorded his observations in a journal, using a cryptographic system developed by a math teacher in their group. These notes would be transmitted through Minji's network, building a global understanding of their enemy's capabilities and limitations. Know your enemy better than they know themselves. he whispered, recalling his drill instructor's words from basic training. The Vraxians had studied humans as specimens. Humans were studying Vraxians as equals. That fundamental difference might determine Earth's fate. Professor Nasir rubbed his bloodshot eyes, the holographic components of the alien weapon hovering before him in the lab's augmented reality system. The breakthrough had come at 3:42 am, when Dr. Tanaka identified the quantum signature that preceded each energy discharge, a microburst of particles that acted as targeting calibration. If we can generate a conflicting signature, Nasir muttered to himself, we might be able to disrupt the targeting sequence entirely. His team had grown to include 214 scientists collaborating through Binge's secure network, each bringing specialized knowledge that alone would be insufficient, but together formed a formidable collective intelligence. A nuclear engineer from Terran had identified the weapon's power source. A quantum computing specialist from Bangalore had reverse-engineered portions of its operating principles. A materials scientist from Nairobi had analyzed its composition. No single human could have deciphered the technology, but together they were making remarkable progress. Nasir's phone vibrated, a rare direct call on their secure channel. "We've captured something you need to see," said Hanambiki without preamble. "My team intercepted a Vraxian scout carrying data crystals. We're sending you the contents now." The encrypted files arrived moments later. Nasir's hands trembled slightly as he loaded them into the isolated system they'd constructed for analyzing alien data, a computer physically disconnected from all networks, running custom software written specifically for this purpose. The files contained Vraxian technical specifications, not for weapons, but for their communication systems. Nasir immediately recognized the significance. "Get me Dr. Williams at Berkeley," he instructed his assistant. "These schematics confirm his gravitational wave theory. Their communications don't rely on electromagnetic transmission. They are using quantum-entangled particles coupled with microgravitational fields." This explained why conventional jamming had been ineffective. The Vraxians weren't using radio waves or any familiar transmission medium. Their communications existed in a domain of physics that humanity had only begun to theorize about. Yet the principles weren't incomprehensible, just advanced. Like deciphering a language with unfamiliar syntax, but recognizable grammar, the human scientists could see patterns in the alien technology that corresponded to their own theoretical models. Nasir sent an urgent message through the secure network. "All communications research teams redirect to gravitational wave detection and generation. Potential avenue for monitoring and disrupting enemy coordination." In the background, his assistant was organizing the laboratory's reconfiguration. They would need new equipment, different expertise. The Resistance's flexibility, its ability to pivot when new information emerged, had become its defining strength. Meanwhile, on the ISS, Commander Wang completed another orbital adjustment using minute bursts from the station's remaining maneuvering thrusters. The aliens had presumed the space station neutralized during their initial attack, not recognizing that its solar panels had been deliberately angled to appear non-functional while still generating minimal power. From his unique vantage point, Wang had mapped the Vraxian fleet deployments, identifying patterns invisible to ground observers. Their ships maintained precise formations that suggested a hierarchical command structure. Disrupt the lead vessel, and the subordinates would be momentarily vulnerable. Wang transmitted this insight through a laser communication system aimed at resistance-controlled mountain reflectors, another communications method the aliens hadn't anticipated. In his MIT laboratory, Nasir received Wang's data and immediately sought its significance. The Vraxian command structure mirrored their technology, elegant, efficient, but rigid. If humans could identify and exploit that rigidity, he turned to his whiteboard, sketching a new approach that combined Wang's observations with the captured technical specifications. The aliens' technological superiority remained overwhelming, but their predictability had become a vulnerability that humanity, chaotic, creative, and increasingly coordinated, might exploit. "We don't need to match their technology," Nasir told his team as they gathered for their dawn briefing. We just need to understand it well enough to undermine it. Sophia Mendes crouched behind the remains of a billboard as her team prepared the modified lighting array. A former lighting director for blockbuster films, she now applied her expertise to weaponizing light itself. The strobing system she designed exploited the discovery about Vraxian vision. Their evolutionary adaptation to a trinary star system made them vulnerable to specific oscillation patterns that humans could tolerate without impairment. "Power cells at 87%, whispered her assistant, a former electrician who had rewired the system to draw energy from abandoned vehicles. "Deployment in 3 minutes." Across the battle zone, 6 similar teams took position, their movements coordinated through Commander Wang's orbital oversight. The plan required synchronization across multiple domains. Ground forces would deploy the disorientation systems, while air support from retrofitted crop dusters would disperse Dr. Singh's refined water compound. "Command confirms Vraxian patrol approaching from the north," came the whispered update through their earpieces. Estimated 23 units with heavy support. Mendes checked her tablet one final time. The aliens had established a command post in what had been Los Angeles City Hall, its distinctive tower now crowned with Vraxian communication equipment. Intelligence suggested a regional commander operated from this location, a prime target for their first large-scale coordinated strike. "Stand by for primary sequence," she instructed, fingers hovering over the activation controls. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the aliens would detect the power surge before their forces were in position. Too late, and the resistance fighters would be exposed. 5 kilometers away, in the hollowed-out remains of the Natural History Museum, Dr. Singh monitored the operation alongside Professor Nasir. Their specialties, medicine and physics, had converged in unexpected ways as they unraveled the aliens' biological and technological vulnerabilities. Aerial units in position, reported a former traffic controller who now coordinated their limited air assets. Dispersal systems primed. Singh checked the compound readouts one final time. The refinement had increased potency by 340% while reducing the required volume, crucial for their limited production capacity. The solution now carried mineral additives that would adhere to Vraxian exoskeletons, prolonging exposure and degrading their protective coatings. "Primary team reports Vraxian command signature detected," announced their communications specialist. "High probability target confirmed on location." This was the element that transformed their operation from mere resistance to strategic offensive. Targeting Vraxian leadership would disrupt their hierarchical command structure, potentially affecting operations across the entire region. Nasir's modified sensors picked up the distinctive energy signature of Vraxian personal shields as they moved into position. The aliens maintained tight formation, their movements precisely coordinated. A disciplined military force unprepared for the asymmetric tactics humans had developed. "Execute primary sequence on my mark," Singh instructed. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Across the battlefield, Mendes activated her lighting array, the precisely calibrated strobes firing in patterns designed to overwhelm Vraxian visual processing. Simultaneously, the crop dusters descended, releasing clouds of the refined compound. Through their surveillance feeds, the Resistance Command watched as the effect cascaded through Vraxian ranks. The aliens' movements became erratic, their formation breaking as individual soldiers struggled to maintain orientation. Their normally synchronized weapons fire scattered wildly, some units firing into empty space as their sensory systems failed to compensate. In the command center, Zralthak received the garbled distress signals with mounting horror. His tactical display showed coordinated human attacks unfolding simultaneously across 12 major battlefields. Impossible for a species that should lack the technology to synchronize such operations. "Contingency Protocol Theta," he ordered, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "All units disengage and regroup at secondary positions." It was the first formal retreat order issued in his long career, an admission that his forces had been outmaneuvered by prey that refused to behave as expected. 15-year-old Zachariah Johnson hunched over his custom-built interface, fingers flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously. The Vraxian battle network had adapted to his previous intrusions, implementing quantum authentication protocols that shifted at irregular intervals. But Zachariah had anticipated this. His algorithm mutated faster than their security measures, staying just ahead of detection. "I'm maintaining access to their navigational subsystems," he reported to his handler, a former NSA analyst who coordinated the digital front of the resistance. "But they've added redundancies to their targeting matrices." The basement server farm hummed around him, cooled by a jury-rigged system that channeled groundwater through copper pipes. His parents, both electrical engineers, maintained the hardware, while Zachariah focused exclusively on penetrating alien systems. "New order just propagated through their command channels," he announced, watching encrypted data packets flow through his interceptors. "They're implementing a strategy they're calling concentrated preservation, pulling back to fortified positions around their primary extraction facilities." This intelligence was immediately relayed to Resistance headquarters, where Hanambiki integrated it with field reports from ground teams. The Vraxian consolidation created both opportunities and risks. Their forces would be more concentrated but better defended. "They're adapting again," Mbiki noted, marking the new defensive perimeters on their tactical maps. "But slower than before. Their responses are becoming predictable." She transmitted updated instructions to field teams. "Focus reconnaissance on extraction facilities. Identify resource processing methods and vulnerabilities." Meanwhile, aboard his damaged flagship, Zralthak faced the first challenge to his authority. Sub-Commander Vexkar stood rigidly before him, flanked by 2 senior officers. "The Supreme Council demands explanation for our tactical retreats," Vexkar stated, his cranial ridges flushed with the bioluminescent patterns of aggression. "Our forces outnumber the humans. Our technology exceeds theirs by centuries of development. Yet we concede territory daily." Zralthak's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of stress no Vraxian commander should display. "The humans implement asymmetric warfare, unlike any species we've encountered." They are prey," interrupted Vexkar. "Primitive mammals who should be grateful to serve the Dominion. Perhaps our failures stem from leadership, not enemy capability." The challenge was explicit, unprecedented in Vraxian military hierarchy, where authority remained absolute until formally revoked by the Council. Zralthak recognized the dangerous moment. "You propose an alternative strategy, Sub-Commander. Direct orbital bombardment of their resistance centers. Eliminate their leadership structure. Accept collateral damage to resources as necessary cost for rapid subjugation." The Council authorized resource preservation as our primary objective, Zralthak countered. "Bombardment would contaminate water repositories and destroy mineral extraction opportunities." Vexkar's posture shifted subtly, the biomechanical precursor to potential violence. "Then perhaps the Council should receive a more accurate assessment of our situation." The power struggle aboard the flagship remained invisible to human observers, but its effects soon manifested in Vraxian operations. Field units received conflicting orders, some implementing aggressive new tactics while others maintained defensive postures. Zachariah detected the command inconsistencies immediately. "Something's happening in their chain of command," he reported. "Contradictory directives are being issued simultaneously from different authority nodes." Mbiki recognized the opportunity. They're experiencing internal conflict. Exploit the confusion. Prioritize targets receiving contradictory orders. The Resistance quickly adapted their operations, targeting Vraxian units caught between conflicting directives. These precision strikes further destabilized alien command structure, creating a feedback loop that amplified their organizational dysfunction. By evening, Zralthak reasserted control, but at significant cost. 3 senior officers were executed for insubordination, their bodies ejected into space according to Vraxian tradition. The Supreme Hunter secured his authority, but the unprecedented challenge revealed a fracturing of the invaders' once monolithic command structure. The predators were indeed becoming prey, not just to human resistance, but to their own inflexibility and growing internal divisions. The Geneva War Room fell silent as Hannah Mbeki outlined her audacious plan. Representatives from former enemy nations exchanged skeptical glances, the proposal seeming more like desperate fiction than viable strategy. "We can't defeat their purification fleet through conventional means," Mbeki acknowledged, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she proposed. "But we can change the calculation that drives their decisions. For that, we need Zralthak alive and misinformed." General Petrov leaned forward, his weathered face grave. "You propose allowing their commander to escape with falsified intelligence. What prevents them from detecting the deception?" Professor Nasir activated a holographic display showing schematics of Vraxian neural interfaces. Their command technology integrates directly with their nervous systems. Any intelligence Zralthak absorbs becomes encoded as first-hand sensory data, indistinguishable from actual experience. "And you can hack this interface?" asked the Chinese military attaché, skepticism evident. "Not directly," admitted Zachariah, the teenage prodigy now granted equal standing with military leaders. "But their system requires periodic synchronization with their central network. During that process, there's a 3-second window where modified data packages can be inserted." Dr. Singh stepped forward. "We've analyzed their neurophysiology. Their memory encoding is remarkably similar to our own, subject to the same influences of emotion and confirmation bias. If Zralthak believes he's witnessing evidence of devastating human capabilities, his own fear will strengthen the false memory imprint." The room's atmosphere shifted as the scientific and psychological foundations of the plan became clear. This wasn't mere deception. It was precisely targeted neurological warfare. Commander Wang, participating via secure video link from the ISS, provided the orbital perspective. "The approaching fleet maintains formation that suggests they'll defer to Zralthak's assessment. Their culture prizes first-hand experience above all other intelligence sources." As the War Council debated implementation details, Mbeki isolated key officers to coordinate the most delicate aspect of the operation, allowing a controlled Vraxian escape while creating the illusion of a desperate human attempt to prevent it. "We need their defeat to appear narrow and costly," she explained. "If the escape seems too easy, they'll suspect manipulation." Meanwhile, Professor Nasir and his global team worked feverishly on the prototype quantum resonator, a device that couldn't actually harm the purification fleet, but could generate energy signatures mimicking theoretical human weapons technology. The deception required physical evidence to accompany the planted intelligence. In orbit, Commander Wang made subtle adjustments to Earth's remaining satellites, positioning them to detect the incoming purification fleet while appearing to be part of a weapons targeting grid. The Vraxians would see evidence of preparedness that aligned with the false intelligence. The operation's ethical implications weren't lost on the participants. They were weaponizing truth itself, creating a reality that existed only in their enemy's perception. Some found this more disturbing than conventional warfare. "If we survive this," Dr. Singh commented to Mbeki during a rare break, "we'll need to reckon with the precedent we're setting." Mbeki nodded grimly. "History is written by the survivors. First, we ensure there are human historians left to write it." As implementation began, Zachariah identified the perfect moment for Zralthak's planned escape. During a synchronized system update that would make Vraxian networks particularly vulnerable to the insertion of falsified data, the resistance forces began staged withdrawals from key positions, creating the appearance of preparation for a desperate last stand. They wanted the Vraxians to believe humans were consolidating around specific locations that would appear in the falsified intelligence as weapon deployment sites. The gambit required perfect coordination across military, scientific, and intelligence domains. If any element failed, Earth would face the full might of a purification fleet, with nothing to deter them from planetary annihilation. 3 months after the peace treaty signing, Dr. Amara Singh stood in the first joint human-Vraxian research facility, observing an unprecedented collaboration. Scientists from both species worked side by side, their previous enmity transformed into cautious professional respect. "Their molecular biology is remarkable," commented Dr. Tanaka, studying a holographic display of Vraxian cellular structures. "Silicon-based, yet with organic flexibility we never thought possible." The facility represented something beyond mere scientific exchange. It was the physical manifestation of a philosophical shift. The former invaders now approached humans as equals, a concept that had been literally unthinkable in their previous worldview. Ambassador Kovacs, formerly science director in Zralfak's War Council, approached Singh with the deliberate movements that indicated formal communication. "The medical applications you proposed have been approved by the Dominion Science Authority," he announced. "Your water-based treatments for our degenerative shell condition will be implemented across our colonies." Singh nodded, recognizing the significance. The same knowledge of Vraxian physiology that had been weaponized during the war was now being applied to heal, and the educational exchange program. "The first human students will be welcomed on Vrax Prime next solar cycle. Your mathematical prodigies have been granted unprecedented access to our theoretical physics archives." Outside the research complex, visible through vast windows, construction drones from both species worked in concert, building infrastructure that would serve as a permanent embassy. The architecture itself told the story of their evolving relationship, neither human nor Vraxian in design, but something genuinely new that incorporated elements from both traditions. In Geneva, Hannah Mbeki now served as Earth's security coordinator, overseeing the integration of defensive technologies shared by the Vraxians as part of the peace agreement. The former hunter species had developed remarkable early warning systems through millennia of expansion, systems now being adapted to protect Earth from other potential threats in the galaxy. "The Deep Space Monitoring Grid is operational," reported Commander Wang, recently returned from overseeing its installation at the Lagrange points. "We can now detect approaching vessels at 10 times our previous range." Mbeki studied the data with mixed emotions. The technology transfer had accelerated humanity's development by centuries, but she remained vigilant about dependency. "Ensure our engineers fully understand the underlying principles, not just the operation protocols." Most significant was the transformation occurring within Vraxian society itself. For the first time in their history, they faced existential questions about their identity. A species defined by conquest had encountered another that could not be conquered, and the philosophical implications rippled through their culture. Young Vraxians increasingly sought assignments to Earth, fascinated by human adaptability. Their educational systems, previously focused on military doctrine and resource extraction, began incorporating studies of culture, cooperation, and diplomatic strategy. Zralfak himself, rather than facing execution for his failure as Vraxian tradition demanded, had been reassigned as primary liaison to humanity, his first-hand experience deemed too valuable to lose. The former Supreme Hunter now walked the halls of human universities as a lecturer, explaining Vraxian culture to packed auditoriums of students eager to understand their former enemies. In Kansas, Zachariah Johnson led a joint programming team developing new communication protocols that bridged human and Vraxian systems. His experience hacking alien networks had made him uniquely qualified to create secure interfaces between the disparate technologies. "Their binary thinking is so literal," he explained to his team, "a mix of human prodigies and young Vraxian tech specialists. But they're learning to appreciate our cognitive flexibility, and we're learning from their structural precision." This exchange of complementary strengths had become the hallmark of the post-war relationship, each species finding in the other capabilities they themselves lacked.